Universal Design for Learning, Reflection by Joseph Moynihan. I'm going to be discussing the reflection on UDL to accurately assess student progress, applying UDL framework to lesson development, and UDL goals, methods, materials, and assessments. Starting from the beginning, Universal Design for Learning for goal setting, methods, materials, and assessments. Over the following presentation, I'm going to review how the UDL concepts apply to the goals, methods, materials, and assessments, and how all of these sub-processes are interrelated under the UDL banner. Goals, identifying the difference between the ends and the means. As it explained in the module, the means, how they will reach the goal, are separate from the end product that students produce. By separating the means from the ends, more students are able to achieve the goal of the lesson. If students have difficulty with writing, they can demonstrate their knowledge through a variety of other means. If the goal of the assessment is to assess mastery over a concept, or skill, or an idea, then it really doesn't matter what methods students utilize to illustrate that mastery. Now, if you are attempting to assess whether or not a student had gained mastery over writing, then you would have to use a writing assessment. However, if it's another unrelated skill, then it really isn't necessarily fair to assess them using writing, as maybe that's not the strength that that student has. So there's a difference between the ends and the means. And if you truly want to assess an objective unrelated to the actual medium being used, then a teacher should provide alternatives, variances, and a more multimodal approach for actually assessing their students. Which leads us to methods and materials, which are sort of interrelated. So with methods, you have the learning formats, instructional formats, the presentation formats, all of which are the different ways that a teacher goes about instructing his or her students. But the questions are, how are these methods presented a barrier to learning? If you only utilize one method, for example, lecturing, then you're not actually utilizing all the methods that students use in order to learn. Again, while we learn that Garner's multiple intelligences isn't exactly true, it does still hold true that individuals need a variance of input methods, including visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So how do we vary the methods from the very beginning? That's the point of UDL, is that we're not altering or making accommodations after we realize that our instruction has been ineffective for our students, but we recognize the differences prior to ever starting our lesson or creating our curriculum. So we embed these already into what we're doing. So providing students with lectures, but also interactive group work and flipped classroom videos to allow them for pre-classroom instruction. Alternating the methods of instruction will make your class more effective and allow for basically a prerequisite method of accommodation. Which leads us into materials. Materials, similarly to methods, you need to alternate them in order to provide an authentic, fruitful means of basically assessment and instruction. So the module provided text, images, videos, paper, pencils, crayons, they went on and on. How do we create a multimodal learning environment utilizing a variety of materials? Well, the first thing to do is actually provide those materials. And on a teaching perspective, you need to know how to effectively use those materials yourself in order to facilitate a student's use. Within our college experiences, we typically have to create multimodal presentations from the perspective of students. So we would take the concept or material and then utilize, whether it be Google Docs or video production, iMovie, etc., and utilize it from the student's perspective. This is useful so that we can actually understand the complications and the issues that students might go through and some of the ways that we went about solving these issues as an adult. It's sort of that metacognition. So additionally, having those materials, a variety of materials, readily accessible and understanding how to utilize them yourself in order to facilitate the students being able to use them. That's going to bring us into assessments. There's always more than one way to skin a cat. The goals, the assessments, and the materials are all interrelated, sort of like the recycling symbol, in which they all feed into one another. You establish your goals, exactly what you want your students to do. Then you utilize the materials in which you want students to use and for you to use in your instruction. So you provide them with basically models of how to go about using multimodality in order to present information, and thus they have a model in which to synthesize your information and create it themselves, whether it be in the form of writing, or it's a multimodal presentation like a Prezi, or a digital video, or even a cartoon in Comic Life 2.0. It provides them with a model in which to synthesize the information, inevitably leading us to the assessment. The assessment is going to be that multimodal approach in which a student illustrates mastery over a skill, a concept, or an idea using whatever approach they feel strongest in. Which leads us back once again into the goal. Now that we've established that they understand and they've mastered that concept, we can go on to the next goal in the cyclical process. So using UDL to track student progress, methods of utilizing UDL to track. Now, there are a number of means, multiple means of assessment. For one, the best means of assessing a student's progress is by providing them with alternative means. As we've talked about at great length before, if we are truly only attempting to assess their mastery over a concept or a skill, then regardless of what method they use to illustrate that mastery is inconsequential, so long as they've illustrated mastery over that concept. Secondly, assessments must be directly linked to learned material. This is something I've seen quite a bit in the past, where teachers will actually assess students based on information they perceive them to already have, this sort of schema, this background information. But it's not fair to test students on information that you haven't directly provided them. So only utilize information in your assessments that has directly been provided within your instruction and curriculum. The third one, incorporating digital tools supports differences in the recognition, strategic, and effective networks. As we learned about with the initial UDL reflection, there is the recognition, which is basically the how, the strategic, why, effective, is more the synthesizing of it. Networks, each of these are different, sort of like the Garner's multiple intelligences, but it's more science-based. So it's basically what aspects of the brain are utilized for these different tasks. So incorporating different tools supports the differences within these, basically accommodating prior to instruction the student's learning needs. And the fourth one, and probably one of the most important in my opinion, especially in my own teaching, is the embedded assessments. Assessments taken concurrently with the lesson provides in-context feedback and instructional support. Just to provide some insight, again, I've talked about this quite a bit in the past, using the Google Docs is something that I absolutely love, especially for the teacher and the peers, providing constant daily feedback. I'm not a huge individual when it comes down to grades. However, I do provide feedback every single day, whether it be an exit ticket, a ticket in the door, whether it be an assignment or activity that they're doing within the classroom. I think a feedback concurrently with the lesson is essential, because when you provide it at the end of the lesson or the examination or the assessment, whatever the case may be, it tends to have this concluding feeling to it, and it doesn't provide this process-orientated approach. Students need to understand what they're doing well and what mistakes they're making while they're learning the material, not afterwards, not as an afterthought. They need to learn it in order to be able to synthesize that information and improve upon it for the inevitable assessment. So that's going to bring us to the module reflection. Why is it important for educational leaders to understand the UDL framework? It's important for educational leaders to understand the UDL framework simply because it provides their students with the necessary supports and mediums of assessments in order to be successful as learners, as synthesizers of concepts and information. How can you understanding UDL help leaders to make educational decisions? Well, a lot of our decisions with curriculum and assessments are based on basically what our curriculum is going to be. So understanding that you need to have certain supports, certain mediums, certain alternatives, and understanding, more importantly, the three networks and the ways that students actually learn prior to creating this curriculum is essential. It's basically this prerequisite thought process that allows us to accommodate a student's need before ever creating the curriculum. Then, in what ways can leaders motivate and engage school personnel in implementing the UDL framework? In my opinion, the best way to motivate others and engage school personnel in implementing UDL framework, or really any important concept, whatever the case may be, is to implement it yourself. One of the best things to do is create a UDL based or a multimodal instructional environment. And as teachers begin coming into your classroom or seeing the work that your students are doing, it just naturally begins this conversation within the school. At St. Joe's, I did the digital video unit, and I used Comic Life 2.0. So there's a multiple areas of materials, methods, and resources that I utilize. And teachers began to ask questions. Well, why is it that you're using this digital video? What are you getting out of it? May I see basically what your students had come up with? And as I began to utilize these multiple tools and allow my students to synthesize in various ways, the information just gets out there. So teachers begin wondering, well, what materials are you using? How are you using it? What are the effects that you've been finding? So honestly, the best way is, just as you do with your students, is to model the practice. How does UDL relate to your current or future practice? As I talked about, while I really hadn't been familiar with the concept of UDL prior to the semester, a lot of the same best practices were already implemented in my class. To include the multiple forms of representation, I constantly provided my students with the laundry list and all of the links and the tutorial videos on how to utilize all of these different methods, including like Comic Life 2.0. We had a couple other comic features. Google Drive, digital video production was a huge part of ours. Whatever the medium, and whether it be music, or writing, whatever method they wanted to utilize was fine with me, so long as they illustrated mastery over the concept, and I was more than happy to provide them with alternative rubrics and methods of assessment. And inevitably, representation was huge. I really like to do the pre-instruction, allowing them to kind of understand concepts, providing resources prior to ever getting into the classroom, and then utilizing that time for actual assessment and feedback in the process. That being said, leads us to our references. We have the 4 here, including the 3 CAS modules. Thank you very much for listening to my reflection. Have a great day.